Good morning. Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Yarmouth. My name is Jane Makala, and I'm a member of the Faith in Action Council. I'm happy to be greeting you today. Though COVID case numbers unfortunately remain very high and we find ourselves once again gathering online, I am imagining all of you spread out around me in the pews of our beloved sanctuary, and I know that we are still together. I'm grateful to share this morning with you. At First Universalist, our mission is to explore our faith, embrace this community, and to engage the world as spiritual seekers. May we take those words to heart. Before we begin our service, I have two announcements. First, bundle up and come down to our church grounds for some winter fun this afternoon. From 2 to 3 p.m., folks will be outside building snowmen, making snow lanterns, and eating cookies. Because no one is ever too old to play outside, properly dressed, this event welcomes all ages of our community. Our second announcement is an invitation to join us for a nourishing all-church retreat, the Care for Ourselves and Others retreat, led by Reverend Hillary and Gwen on January 22nd from 9:30 to 12:30 in the morning on Zoom. During our time together, we will practice our gifts for sharing, listening, and evoking the spirit of life that exists within all of us. You can find links to register for the retreat in this week's channels. And if you have questions, please contact Reverend Hillary or Gwen. Now, I invite you to take a deep breath with me as we settle into this time together. Sam Chandler, our music director, will now play us into worship.
Good morning. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jane. How are you all? Are you warm enough? It is chilly out there. Whew. It's good to be with you on this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. My name is Reverend Hillary Collins-Gilpatrick. I'm the minister of First Universalist Church in Yarmouth, Maine, a church that rests on land that does not rightfully belong to us, but rather belongs to the tribes of the Wabanaki. And it is with great hope, intentionality, and care that I say, whoever you are, wherever you are from, whomever you love, whatever it is you have done, you are welcome here. And we're so glad you're here. Friends, today we offer you a service of word and melody, of silence, prayer, and a call to action in honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, were he still alive, would have turned 93 years old yesterday. As King preached over and over again the good news of radical love, of revolutionary love, our opening words are a love poem by the radical, revolutionary thinker, teacher, writer, and lover, Bell Hooks. Hooks very sadly died a month ago, but though her physical body is gone from this earthly plane, her spirit and soul force will certainly remain with us for a very long time. The reading I offer this morning is from her book of poetry entitled Angels Speak of Love. The poem is simply titled Number 2. In love, there are no closed doors. Each threshold, an invitation to cross. Take hold, take heart, and enter here at this point where truth was once denied. I'm going to read it again. It's so good. I'm going to read it again. In love, there are no closed doors. Each threshold, an invitation to cross. Take hold, take heart, and enter here at this point where truth was once denied. Good morning, my friends. On this brisk, bright, and clear day, how good it is to be alive and awake with you. As we begin our communal time of worship, won't you join me now in the words of our Unison Affirmation? These are printed in your order of worship, and thank you, Joanna, for just putting them in the chat. We are united in seeking to increase love with justice and to constitute a free church open to all people. Mindful of our past and drawing upon modern knowledge, we respond to the spiritual needs of persons and are devoted to the common good in community, nation, and world. We cherish the integrity of each individual and search for truth with reason as our guide. We respect differences of opinion and strive to be a democratic community. We are concerned with this world and open to the future. And won't you lift your voice again with me, my friends, as we light our chalice, the bright symbol of our faith. We light our chalice in peace and friendship. Sam will now lead us in our opening hymn, number 1045, and your teal hymnal, if you have one at home. There is a balm in Gilead.
I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about this hymn a little bit. So this is another one of those oldies back from the 1800s, African American spiritual from the slavery period. This particular hymn is drawn from the scripture of Jeremiah 8. And just to talk about it a little bit today, I'm actually going to read a Martin Luther King quote from one of his speeches. This is actually the closing remarks of one of his speeches where he talks about this particular hymn. So he says, "Centuries ago, Jeremiah raised a question. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there?" He raised it because he saw good people suffering so often and the evil people prospering. Centuries later, our slave foreparents came along. This is King. And they too saw the injustices of life and had nothing to look forward to morning after morning but the rawhide whip of the overseer, long rows of cotton in the sizzling heat. But they did an amazing thing. They looked back across the centuries and they took Jeremiah's question mark and straightened it into an exclamation point. And they could sing, "There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul." And there is another stanza that I liked so well. "Sometimes I feel discouraged." And I don't mind telling you this morning that sometimes I feel discouraged. I felt discouraged in Chicago. As I move through Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama, I feel discouraged. Living every day under the threat of death, I feel discouraged sometimes. Living every day under extensive criticisms, even from my fellow Negroes, I feel discouraged sometimes. Yes, sometimes I feel discouraged and my work's in vain, but then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. So this hymn obviously has a long history, including more recently when Martin Luther King spoke. I really appreciate the opportunity to read some of Martin Luther King's words for this service, and I would suggest that if there's anything you do after the service is over, it would be to read some Martin Luther King. This particular speech was called "Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool," August 27th, 1967. So now I'm going to play "There is a Balm in Gilead." Feel free to sing along at home.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mac.
Good morning. Hey, Gwen, do you know what we're celebrating on Monday?
Can you remind me?
Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Oh, right. Yeah, I should have remembered that. All right. So I've learned about Martin Luther King Jr. in school, and I've read some of his speeches before. Yeah, he's pretty amazing and an important Black civil rights leader.
Yes, exactly. Today, though, I want to talk about someone who is pretty amazing and important, the author Langston Hughes.
Oh, yeah. Langston Hughes writes some beautiful, moving, powerful poetry.
He does. He was also a leader in the Harlem Renaissance and a social activist.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I have an idea. Can we say one of my favorite poems of his together right now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. This one is called Dream Variations. It's a poem that has a whole lot of movement. So I like to move along with it. Watch, okay? And it starts like this. To fling my arms wide in some place of the sun.
To whirl and dance till the white day is done.
Then rest at cool evening beneath a tall tree.
When night comes on gently, dark like me.
That is my dream, to fling my arms wide in the face of the sun.
Dance, whirl, whirl till the quick day is done.
Rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree.
Night coming tenderly, black like me. Wow, what a great poem.
Yes. The only thing is, sometimes I get so caught up in doing the fun movements that I miss some parts of the poem.
Okay, like what parts?
Well, for example, it's not just dancing and whirling for any reason. It's to whirl and to dance till the white day is done.
Oh, why does that stand out to you?
Because I think the white day that Langston Hughes is talking about is a lot like the things Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about too. The white day being done is about ending the days when white people are always in charge of everything, or when white people are always considered more important than people of other colors.
Yes, so the dream to dance and whirl too is probably supposed to represent celebrating the day when finally Black people get to be seen as and treated as just as important and valuable as white people.
And it reminds me of one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s most famous quotes too.
Yes, I think I know which one you're thinking of. He said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will someday live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Yes, yeah, that's the one.
Hey, Gwen. Hey, everyone. Can we do that poem again? But this time, maybe you can join in with the motions with us.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do all the motions all together. Okay, it starts like this. To fling my arms wide in some place of the sun.
To whirl and dance till the white day is done.
Then rest at cool evening beneath a tall tree.
When the night comes on gently, dark like me.
That is my dream, to fling my arms wide in the face of the sun.
Dance, twirl, whirl, till the quick day is done.
Rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree.
Night coming tenderly, black like me.
Thanks, Mac. Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad we could share that poem together today. And now let's do our children's blessing together too. We are Unitarian Universalists, people of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands.
Thank you so much, Gwen and Mac, for the recitation of that beautiful poem. I feel like we need to incorporate more twirling and whirling into our worship services. That felt nice on my body. So thank you for that. My friends, we now come to the time in our service that we set aside for quiet prayer and meditation. This is a time to reflect on the events of the past week, perhaps, maybe look forward to what may come in the days ahead, or simply be here now, in this moment, and all that it offers in sensation and emotion. Following this time of quiet, I will open our time of sharing, and all will be welcome to share a joy, sorrow, or concern you hold today. My friends, won't you join me now in taking a deep, refreshing breath in, a calming breath out, and enter into a sacred time of silence. For all that has been said, for all we hold inside, for all we simply do not have the words to explain, we hear you, we hold you, and we pray for your immediate comfort, continued joy, a path forward, and the seeds of peace. You are loved, my friend, and you belong. Amen. Jane will now introduce our offering.
Our sixth principle, peace, liberty, and justice for all, echoes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. To honor this ideal, today's half-plate recipient is the Maine Unitarian Universalist State Advocacy Network. MUSON connects Maine's 26 UU congregations to amplify our influence in several important broad social justice policy areas in Maine. One current key issue for MUSON is LD 1626, a bill you will hear more about shortly that would remove the state-erected obstacles that Maine's 4 Wabanaki tribes face. MUSON's website, muson.org, provides easy-to-use tools to put our faith into action this month and every month. We're grateful for their work today as together we seek justice for Maine's Wabanaki communities. If you are able, please give generously to support the work of this important collaboration. You're invited to make your offering using the donate button in the order of worship. By clicking this link, you will be taken to Give Butter, a virtual giving site that accepts a card number, PayPal, and Venmo accounts. You may also give your offering by dropping a check in the mail or using your bank's free bill pay feature. This morning's offering has now been requested and will be gratefully received. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. It's one of my favorites. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1966 lecture, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." He spoke. "One of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the new situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution. And there can be no gainsaying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our world today. We see it in our own nation, in the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. And as we notice this struggle, we are aware of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our midst. Victor Hugo once said that there is nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come. The idea whose time has come today is the idea of freedom and human dignity. And so all over the world, we see something of a freedom explosion. And this reveals to us that we are in the midst of revolutionary times. An older order is passing away and a new order is coming into being. The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? The reading ends here.
You've probably seen the bright yellow and orange stand with Wabanaki logo in our newsletter with information about a tribal sovereignty bill pending in the Maine legislature to be voted on sometime between now and late April. The bill number is 1626 and it has a title a yard long, but I'll just refer to it as the Tribal Sovereignty Bill. Progressive Maine legislators and social justice organizations identify the problems this bill addresses as the most pressing systemic racism issue we face in Maine today. The Wabanaki Alliance, which unites Maine's tribes in their strong self-determination, has put out the call to action for us to let our legislators know we want their support of this bill, especially since a supermajority may be needed if Governor Mills vetoes, as she has threatened. But wait a minute, me? Take action? I'm too busy right now. There are people out there with much greater skills and expertise that can do this. That issue isn't one I can relate to. I just don't know enough about it. The problem is too vast and I'm just one person. Frankly, I'm so overwhelmed with the state of the world right now that all I want is to go back to sleep. Any of those fit you? Maybe all of them. I'm going to briefly explain the tribal justice call to action and why none of the rationalizations I've just recited need keep us immobilized. The relationship between the state and the tribes has been rife with injustice and disrespect since Maine first became a state in 1820 and began violating federal Indian law in its own right. A century and a half later, in 1980, a tribal land claims lawsuit based on that sad history was settled in such a way that the tribes gave up their claims and agreed to defer to Maine law in certain areas. The federal government came up with a pot of money to assist the tribes, including with purchasing land. And the state of Maine, well, I'm still scratching my head over exactly what the state contributed to this settlement. But fast forward through the next 40 years of conflict and litigation over the terms of the settlement to the Maine legislature's creation of a task force to consider revisions. Their 22 recommendations became the pending Tribal Sovereignty Bill. The unifying theme of its many complex components is the right of the tribes to govern themselves and their territory and to determine their future as sovereign governments and not simply subdivisions of the state of Maine, as the state considers them. The bill does not grant sovereignty to the tribes, and it doesn't give it back, because tribal sovereignty is inherent in just the way we UUs affirm that human worth is inherent. Tribal sovereignty is acknowledged in the US Constitution and has existed as long as there have been indigenous groups functioning as communities on this land. What this bill does do is dismantle numerous barriers that currently impede the tribe's full exercise of such sovereignty, just the way so many civil rights laws have dismantled roadblocks to the inherent worth and dignity and basic rights of other marginalized and oppressed people in our country's history. Does this change have to happen right now? Let this fact wash over you and then you decide. As part of this settlement, no federal law passed after 1980 to assist federally recognized Indian tribes, and there are another 570 such tribes outside the state of Maine. No such laws apply to Maine's 4 federally recognized tribes. And there have been over 150 such laws passed since 1980, laws that could otherwise have assisted Maine's tribes with economic development, access to health care, funding to respond to emergencies, and so much more. Maine's tribes have watched that list grow each year, the mounting gauge of injustice. Okay, what about that list of rationalizations we started with? Well, if you care, if what you've just heard has your UU radar humming with the injustice of it all, consider yourself officially pre-qualified for action. And here's how easy it is. If you have a computer and maybe a printer handy, or even just a phone, you can do it from your desk or your couch. You don't need to make a sign. You don't need to drive to Augusta. You don't even need to wear a mask. Muson, responding to the Wabanaki Alliance call to action, has created its own Stand with Wabanaki webpage. Just go to muson.org, click on that yellow and orange logo. There you can not only learn more about the bill, but you can easily get everything you need to contact your legislator, from finding their name and contact info to a letter you can simply copy, paste, and customize, and even a list of reasons you can select from to cut and paste into the letter to your own legislator. There are even directions for writing letters as a group activity, if that appeals to you. We have been told that if legislators get even 5 constituent letters or calls about a pending bill, they really sit up and take notice. Just 5. Why, we could get that number of letters sent out this afternoon and another 25 by next Sunday. We might even share our enthusiasm with a few friends who will write their own letters. And thus, systemic change becomes possible. That sound you hear is tribal justice calling. Go ahead, take that call.
Thank you, Jane. I told you, Jane, I was excited for you to share with us a call to action this morning, because you always get me all riled up. I feel all riled up right now and it feels good. Thank you. Friends, I posted the link to the Musan Stand with Wabanaki page in our chat if you would prefer to do that than listen to my sermon this morning. Though it's a decent sermon, you could stick around if you like to. We can always look at the Musan page during our coffee hour. On May 18th, 1966, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered an address entitled "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution" to 800 or so lay and ordained delegates at the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association. MLK was the Ware lecturer that year. King derived the title of his lecture from the old folktale of Rip Van Winkle, the man who fell asleep for 20 years only to wake up and discover that during his long nap, the American Revolution had occurred, and where once hung a picture of King George, now hung a portrait of George Washington. When Rip Van Winkle looked up at the picture of George Washington, King explained, he was amazed. He knew not who he was. King goes on, one of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the new situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution. King's lecture, therefore, is a call to stay awake during the revolution. And more specifically, it is a call for the church to stay awake during the revolution. MLK defines the church as the moral guardian of the community and of society. It is an institution that must broaden horizons, challenge the status quo, and question and break mores if necessary. And in the instance here, the church that King directly instructs to stay awake is our own. He then suggests 4 things the church must do to remain awake during this revolution. The first, instill within our congregation a world perspective of brotherhood. All I'm saying, he explains, is that all life is interrelated. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Though our 7th principle, respecting the interdependent web of existence for which we are all a part, had not yet been drafted, King provided us here with a theological tenet in advance. The second thing we must do to stay awake is reaffirm over and over the essential immorality of racial segregation. The third thing the church must do is refute the idea that there are superior and inferior races. I'm sure you don't have any Unitarian Universalists who believe this doctrine of white supremacy King expressed to the gathered community, I like to think, with a piercing and unflinching gaze. And the fourth thing the church must do to stay awake is to move out into the arena of social action. It is not enough, MLK explains, for the church to work in the ideological realm and to clear up misguided ideas. To remain awake through the social revolution, the church must engage in strong action programs to get rid of the vestiges of segregation and discrimination. And here he shifts his focus in his lecture and describes 2 myths we must eradicate from our thinking. The first myth, going back to what Jane just called us to do, is the notion that legislation is not effective in bringing about changes that we need in human relations. It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated, King preaches. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. The law cannot make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me. And so while the law may not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. It is necessary for the church to support strong, meaningful civil rights legislation. The second myth King says we must rid from our minds is that of exaggerated progress. Certainly, we have made progress in race relations, but we must realize the plant of freedom is only a bud and not yet a flower, he reminds us. We've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. King concludes his Where lecture by outlining the philosophy of nonviolent direct action and his ethic of love, which he describes as an understanding, creative, redemptive goodwill for all, an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. The philosophy of nonviolence and this ethic of love are the sole force, as King calls it, that will energize us as we remain awake. Having now shared this very basic summary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s profound and provocative Where lecture that I encourage you all to go read, I want to turn around here and go back to the beginning, to a part of the lecture that's both rattled and revived me this week. I need not pause to say how delighted I am to be here tonight. King begins his address to the gathered UU assembly. There are those wonderful moments in life when you speak before a group that is so near and dear to you that you don't feel like you have to engage in the art of persuasion. You don't feel like you are in the midst of strangers. You know that you are with friends. At first, when I read these complimentary words, I thought to myself, well, that is pretty generous of you to say, Reverend Dr. King. But as I reread this lecture and these opening words a handful of times this week, King's gracious comments toward our denomination read less and less as a courteous formality and more as an expectation of accountability. By naming us as friends here, MLK is naming us, naming Unitarian Universalists as his allies in the movement for civil rights. That is, the movement to end racial discrimination. So this morning, this Sunday morning of Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, as a voting rights bill lies dead on the Senate floor, as staggering disparities continue to exist across racial lines in our country, as sovereignty for Wabanaki people rests upon a bill our state legislators may or may not prioritize, I offer you, my dear horizon broadening friends, not just the suggestions that Reverend Dr. King gave us for staying awake during this perpetual revolution, but the reminder that he called us his friends in the revolution. And with that friendship comes a great responsibility, a responsibility to stay awake. Martin Luther King graciously provides us with multiple ways to meet this responsibility here in his Where lecture. I wonder, though, if there are a couple other sleep-inducing states of mind at work in our society today that have rendered many of us unconscious. Most revolutions have been based on hope and hate, King states towards the conclusion of his Where lecture, as a misunderstanding of what a revolution can be. My Universalist friends, I'm not going to get into the soporific, numbing, consciousness-altering effects of hate today. But in short, steeping yourself in hatred is not going to keep you alert during this revolution. I do want to take a minute, though, to reflect on hope, which is something I've been struggling lately to define and embody. You see, the way I see it, maintaining a hopeful state of mind could just as easily be a way to stay awake as a way to fall deeply asleep. When hope is fixed on a timeline or within the bounds of a particular vision we have for, say, the end of the pandemic, a bipartisan voting rights bill, worldwide collective action to combat climate change, or even the life path of a loved one. In these cases, hope can easily become disappointment, apathy, and taken to the extreme, despair. So lately, I've been meditating on the question, when it's so rare that anything in life meets our desired deadlines or matches the stencil of our desired outcomes, when hope can so easily turn to suffering and put us to sleep, what is the hope that relieves suffering and keeps us awake? What is skillful hope? Dwelling in this place, hoping for an answer, I was struck last Saturday during the Musan Network meeting when Reverend Jody Hayashida, the minister of First Universalist Auburn, offered a definition of hope in her spirited opening words, urging us to ground ourselves in our deepest values right now. Reverend Hayashida explained that we must shift from optimism to hope. Optimism, she stated, assumes that things will work out the way we want them to. But hope assumes that no act of good will be wasted. That's awakening right there. That woke me up. Hope assumes that no act of good will be wasted. And to me, that's it. That's what hope is. Hope is continuing to live and act as though life matters, and continuing to explore our vast capacity for goodness, not to a particular individually desired end, but so that goodness can live and thrive on earth and naturally create more goodness. Hope is a revolution. We can't control it. We can't control goodness. It's a revolution. And what's an act of goodness? An act of goodness is an act of love. Most revolutions have been based on hope and hate, King said to our UU church. I think the different thing about our revolution is that it has maintained the hope element, and at the same time, it has added a dimension of love, he preaches. A revolution that maintains the hope element and adds a dimension of love. That is a revolution. And what is this love he speaks of? It's a radical love, a level of love one must rise to. It is agape, the highest love, a creative, redemptive goodwill for all, an overflowing love that seeks nothing in return. Goodness for goodness sake. King's love is a radical love, writes Cornel West in The Radical King. a radical love that brings about a radical freedom because it requires the cowardly self to die in order for the courageous self to live. Radical love brings about a radical freedom because it requires the cowardly self to die in order for the courageous self to live. An act of good, my friends, is a courageous, radical act of the highest form of love. You can do it. You can do it. You got it. As the friends of Martin Luther King Jr., it is such goodness we are called to enact. And I don't think he would have called us his friends if he didn't think we could enact such radical goodness. What a blessing. What a gift. And so, on this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and on every single day of our lives, my friends, let's stay awake. Let's continue to understand that our life is interrelated with all life. Let us reaffirm the immorality of racial segregation. Let us refute white supremacy. Let us get out of our heads and into the realm of social action. Let us call our legislators and demand they pass HD 1626 for tribal sovereignty, and demand Susan Collins pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Let us not over-exaggerate our progress, nor dwell in the confines of naive optimism. Let us be a people of hope, assuming no act of good is wasted. And let us act with radical love from that hopeful place, always. Let us be so. Let it be so. Amen. As we come to the end of our worship service, my friends, won't you join me in the words of our Unison benediction? For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. For those who come to seek a path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it step by step. Thank you, Joanna and Pete, for running our tech this morning. Thank you, Jane, for your rousing call to action. Thank you for your poetry and your twirls and whirls, Gwen and Mac. And thank you for your beautiful music, Sam. And thank you all for being here. It is good to be with you. Have a revolutionary afternoon and week and month. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Sam will close our service with the saints go marching.